Hello again guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are taking a look at the FSReborn Sting S4. The aircraft just released with quite a bit of hype ahead of time. I know it's one that quite a few people were looking forward to. It looks to be a very comprehensive and very well made product. Of course the aim of our flight today is going to be to find out whether or not that's true. We're not going to be carrying out a full review of the aircraft, although we're going to try and cover everything as best as we can. Instead we're going to be putting the S4 on a few laps around the circuit here at Denham. We're currently on the ground at Burning Blue Design's most recent release, Denham Airport, and we're going to be, as I say, flying the traffic pattern in the S4. It should be a great opportunity to check out the little ultralight and of course also check out a little bit of Denham as we go. We're first going to be taking a look at the tablet that comes with the aircraft, as it's quite an important feature of the overall product. After that, as usual, we're going to run through from a full cold and dark start all the way through to more or less shutdown here in Denham. And at the end of the video, as usual, I'll spend a few minutes giving you my overall thoughts on the product. Starting with the tablet then, as I say, it's quite an important feature of the product, so we'll just run through that before we get our flight started. So as I say, we'll take a quick look at the FSReborn tablet. Firstly we have the status page. Here of course it shows you the status overall of the Sting S4. There's a multitude of different features on the aircraft in terms of failures and systems. You can see for yourselves here, even the nav lights, the strobe lights, things of that nature, they'll actually accumulate a time of use and obviously fail to some degree based on that. We also have the option to fit and remove a pitot cover as well as some chocks. Again, very impressive overall to see the little Sting S4 modelled quite so nicely. The same is true as well of the engine as well as the battery. And of course, in terms of how we operate both of those, we can actually affect their overall status and whether or not they fail more or less quickly. Onto the Realism page. Here we have our options menu in terms of affecting whether or not things fail on the aircraft, and overall the level of realism of course with the S4. Firstly we have the electrics. You can see we can turn on or off electrical failures, battery wear and tear, light bulb failures as well as light bulb wear and tear. Fuel and payload we can have persistent from the previous flight, which is a nice touch. We can also choose whether or not to allow changes in payload during the flight. For the engine we have engine failure as well as engine wear and tear. You do need to make sure there that you have the engine stress damage turned on within the sim. We can also choose to have engine oil changes and engine coolant changes, and both of those will run down over time. Lastly of course we have the landing gear. We have tyre wear and tear, tyre failures as well as brake wear and tear and brake failures. So again, it really pays to fly the S4 within its limits. The aircraft will respond how you treat it. Onto the maintenance page. Here we can fix up the S4 should we have any issues. The engine does require constant maintenance, as it says on the top left there. Poor oil as well will actually lead to more severe damage, and of course if we run the engine at high power settings for a long period of time, we're expecting the engine to wear down more quickly. Here we can top up the oil as well as do a complete oil change, same for the coolant. We can perform maintenance, or if the aircraft's a little bit beyond help, we can also carry out a full overhaul. From this menu we also fix up the lights, the tyres and the brakes. We can also restow the ballistic parachute should we deploy that during flight. On then to the fuel and weight page, fairly self-explanatory there. Here we can load up the aircraft both with pilots, baggage and also fuel. Nice feature of the aircraft, if we do unload the pilot, the visual model is removed. That's great to see. A lot of add-ons not doing that for some reason. Anyway, for today's flight we've got both wing tanks full. The centre tank there is empty. You can see we've got just the one pilot on board and a little bit of luggage down the back. It'll also give us our empty weight, fuel weight, payload weight and total weight. And overall again a fairly simple but very effective UI there for the fuel and weight. The tablet also has a frequently asked questions page, which is a nice idea. I've not seen that before. As you can see, various questions there that people might come across, and obviously saving FSReborn a little bit of work there as well, should people actually take the time to read the FAQs. Lastly, looking at the settings page, there are various options here, all quite nice to have. You can see we can choose our fuel units, our weight units, our distance and our tyre pressure units. Gauges as well. The aircraft does currently have the option to integrate the PMS GTN 750, which is great. I gather as well there's a free download on the FSReborn site to go and download a file to integrate the TDS GTN 750. There's an EFB option to have the camera auto position when using the EFB. And lastly we have the BRS or Ballistic Rescue System Cinematic. So you can choose once you pull the chute whether or not the camera moves externally, or you can remain internally with the aircraft. Really nice animation on that, we'll see that later on. Aircraft wear and tear, fairly self-explanatory there. We can adjust the rate at which the aircraft tends to fail and wear down. Here we've obviously got it set at normal speed. And lastly for the aircraft stats we can reset all and set the aircraft to a clean configuration. So as you can see, the S4 pretty well modelled overall, really nice systems depth, very much A2A-esque in terms of the failure modelling and the persistent state. Really nice to see, especially from a smaller aircraft and a smaller developer. Hopefully we'll see this trend continuing. Obviously we had the Milviz 310 recently. One last thing to note before we get the recording underway, I did have a couple of issues whilst recording the video itself. Some genius forgot to press record on one of the clips. I've done my best to work around the problem, but you may notice just one or two discrepancies throughout the flight. The ones I noticed myself, you'll see that the turn and slip indicator is constantly out. That's not an issue with the aircraft, that's an issue as a result of me having to patch up the recording. And the same, you might notice me call a couple of speeds or altitudes and they don't quite match up. Nonetheless, the issues that you'll see are pretty minor, and overall you'll still get a very solid feel for the product. Anyway, now that we've taken a look at that, I think the best thing to do, of course, is to get the aircraft up in the air. So let's head for the cockpit of the S4, and we'll get the aircraft started up. So, welcome to the cockpit of the FSReborn Sting S4. As I say, it's pretty early morning here on the ground at Denham. We've just pulled the aircraft out of the hangar. I have to say that FSReborn have done a really nice job with the Sting, pretty immaculate both internally and externally. Of course, we'll take more of a look at that as we go. We just finished our walk around, so running through the engine start checks. The canopy we can close up. Nice sound effects there, and the canopy is closed and locked, just checking that on both sides. Harness is adjusted and fastened, headset is on and adjusted. All switches are off except for the instrument switch. We're going to leave that on for the start. We'll take the nav lights on as well. Fuel valve is on, throttle is idle, main switch can go on. We'll just wait for the G1000 units to fire up. Fuel pump can go on, we'll just leave that on for a couple of seconds to prime the engine. Ignition switch can go to both. Checking that the prop area is clear. No DV window on the aircraft, so we'll just make a visual check. There's no one around. We'll hold the aircraft on the brakes. Fairly warm outside today, so the choke not required for the start. We'll engage the starter. And we do have a good start. Slightly strange on the start up there. We'll just feed the throttle in to idle at 2000 RPM. And the oil pressure is checked, that's come up into the green. Choke, again, not required, so the choke is in. Instrument switch is on. Strobe lights can go on. Intercom is set, flaps will go to half. Indicating half. They're split flaps, so we can't visually identify those. For the pre-taxi checks, the oil pressure, once again, looking good. Transponder is set to standby. VHF is set. GPS is set. Avionics are checked. Turn coordinator looks good. Altimeter, just going to set that right back down to 0 for the traffic pattern. So the altimeter is set. Parachute rescue system. Safety pin has been removed and the handle is stowed. So now just waiting for the engine to warm up here, and then we'll make our way out towards the runway. Okay, so we're down at the holding point for runway 24, going to take an intersection departure here, which does give us a pretty short takeoff run, but it shouldn't be an issue in the Sting. Looking at the windsock there, the wind is pretty dead, so we're going to carry out the run up in our present position, just holding the aircraft on the brakes. The oil temperature looks good, the oil pressure is checked, same for the cylinder head temperature. Coming up then to 4000 RPM. And again, very nice engine sounds there, really good sounds from the aircraft overall so far. So it's 4000 RPM, we'll check the mags, coming onto the left mag. Got just over a 100 RPM, about 120 RPM drop there on the left, we'll go back to both. The max drop we're looking for there is 300, so we're well within limits. Onto the right. Same drop there on the right, we'll come back to both. And we're just coming to manual prop pitch momentarily, we'll cycle the prop. Everything looking good there, we'll go back to auto. And coming back to 2000 RPM. So there's 2000, fuel pressure looks good, the before takeoff checks, harness is secure, loose items are stowed. Flight instruments, Showing a heading there of 180. That looks to be about correct versus the runway. Altimeter, we're just going to set our primary altimeters there as well. We'll set 0 again for flying the circuit. So the altimeters are set, VHF radio is set, transponder can go to out. Flight controls. Are full free and in the correct sense. Canopy is closed and locked. Parachute rescue system, the pin is removed, the handle is stowed. Auxiliary fuel pump, the checklist actually calls to leave that off for the takeoff, so we'll leave it off. Landing light can go on though, so can the pitot heat. Flaps are checked half, and we are now ready to line up, so checking everything all clear on final. We'll clear up wind as well. Just coming up on the power to get the aircraft moving. Okay, so we are all set, coming up to full power. The aircraft is definitely pretty sensitive on the rudder. Looking to rotate at 45 knots, so coming back on the stick. Power looks good, RPM and T's and P's are checked. And pitching to climb at 75 knots initially. Just wait until we come up through 300 feet and then we'll retract the flaps. Aircraft is fairly sensitive on the controls. There's 300 feet. Flaps can come up. And at 500 feet we'll start our turn onto crosswind. Yeah, you can see a little bit twitchy there, getting buffeted around. It's pretty calm conditions outside, so I'm not really sure exactly what the buffeting is. Just come up on 1,000 feet, so we'll level the aircraft off. And come back to our cruise power setting. We'll go for 22 inches on the manifold pressure. Looking good, we'll turn straight onto downwind. That's giving us a pretty high cruise speed at 22 inches, so we'll come back a little bit further there. We'll go for 20 inches. And even 20 inches, the aircraft really wanted to get away from us, so we'll try 18. The Sting, definitely a pretty pacey aircraft so far from what we've seen. Anyway, brakes are off, undercarriage is down, mixture is rich, fuel pump is off, fuel quantity is checked, flight instruments are checked, landing light is on, harness is secure. So downwind check's complete. Just continue tracking downwind for now. Seems that 18 inches is giving us slightly more reasonable speed there. We're doing about 100 knots indicated now. And we'll start our turn onto base. Coming back off the power, we'll start reducing our speed. We come all the way back to idle here just to really help that speed come back so we can take the flaps. Nothing coming down final. Start turning on to final. We'll take half flap. And just looking to maintain around 60 knots here as we come down final approach. 2 whites on the PAPI there at the moment. We'll We'll correct that easily enough in just a moment's time. Just bring our speed back into that white arc, go for 60 knots. Take full flap. So speed's good, there's 55 knots, that should do us on the approach. And pitch is full fine, undercarriage is down, flaps are set. Landing clearance not required, the runway is clear. Anyway, good on profile. Again, getting that slightly strange buffeting from the aircraft. Otherwise, it flies fairly nicely. I know it's a fairly sporty aircraft, but it does feel particularly sporty, I have to say. You saw how much pace we were picking up on downwind there. So bring the throttle back, just holding the aircraft off. Feels pretty good in pitch there as the speed reduces. Trying to settle her onto the runway. There's touchdown, tiny bit of a bounce. Coming back up to full power. And we're up. Yeah, so overall the aircraft flies fairly nicely. Feels broadly representative of its category. Again, we'll just continue to climb straight ahead. Flaps can go to half. And we'll just wait until we're up through 300 feet before we fully retract the flaps. Pitching for 75 knots. Flaps come up. Definitely quite sensitive in pitch though. Really any input on the control and it's moving around quite a lot in pitch. Once again turning onto crosswind. And getting ourselves leveled off at 1,000 feet. Come back to our 18 inches once again. And we'll just come straight into the downwind. Picking up so much speed there in the crosswind that really we don't even need to extend there for the downwind. Yeah, so the aircraft is pleasant enough to fly. It's good fun as well. I think it'd make for a good cruiser, but I wouldn't say the flight model is one of the best I've seen in the sim. It's not bad by any means, but it's definitely a bit more Microsoft Flight Simulator-esque in terms of its pretty sensitive controls and its twitchy nature there in pitch. Anyway, carrying out the downwind checks again. Brakes are off, undercarriage is down, mixture is rich, fuel pump is off, fuel quantity is checked. Flight instruments look good, the landing light is on, harness is secure. Again, just extending that downwind. Again, a beautifully rendered aircraft, really nice modelling and texturing. System's really good as well. Bit of a shame about the default avionics, but that's to be expected in the sim. We'll start our turn onto base. We'll carry out one more landing, then we'll climb straight ahead, do a little bit of aerial work. Once again, coming back off the power. Need to come really back to idle power more or less to bleed off any speed. We'll clear on final. We'll take half flaps. And we'll start to turn on to final. Good fun though, bashing around the circuit. Don't do it often enough in the sim. There's one red, one white on the Pappy. Speed's looking good, we'll just bleed off a little bit more there, coming through 500 feet. Still getting that strange pitching and buffeting there. That's one of the few things I can't say I like about the aircraft. very much so far. It may be that it's true to life for the real Sting, I have no idea. Go flaps full. And once again, pitch is full fine, undercarriage is down, flaps are set, landing clearance not required, the runway is clear, just getting a little bit slow there, so feeding in some power. We are a little bit high as well, so we can pitch the nose down, trade a little bit of altitude for speed. Looking better now on profile. There are quite a few good things about the flight model. I mean, it does broadly feel like a GA aircraft to fly. The controls do feel quite crisp. It's just that pitching around that's slightly frustrating. So once again, back off the throttle. Holding the aircraft off. A little bit of a float. There's touchdown. And again, coming up on the power. Camera up. So just building a little bit of speed before we retract the first stage of flap. Go back to half flaps once again. And again we'll pitch for 75 knots. Up through 300 feet so the flaps can come up. The aircraft seems to be pretty economical on the fuel as well. We loaded up about just over a quarter tank of fuel. We've burned almost none of that so far. Looks like we're doing about 8 gallons an hour at the moment with full chat. We've got 10 on board, so we've still got over an hour's worth of fuel. Anyway, we're just going to climb up into the circuit this time. Again, we'll pitch for 75 knots. Looks like we're getting about 1700 feet per minute rate of climb out of the aircraft. And again, I'm not familiar with the Sting, so I don't know what sort of performance numbers we're expecting, but the aircraft certainly has an abundance of power, plenty of performance. Good little VFR option if you really want to hack along. Obviously, in reality, we wouldn't want to be playing quite so hard and fast here in the circuit at Denham. We do actually sit, I believe, just inside London Heathrow's airspace, but for the sake of today, granted special permission to let me test the aircraft. So just coming up a beam Denham once again. I thought it would be interesting to carry out a couple of manoeuvres here, namely a stall and a spin. As we said earlier, the aircraft is fitted with a ballistic parachute, which usually aircraft fitted with one of those are not capable of recovering from a spin. That's usually the reason that they have one. So I thought it would firstly be interesting to see whether or not we can actually get the aircraft into a stall and a spin, and then firstly we'll see if we can actually recover or not, and then after that, assuming that we can't, and even if we can, we're obviously going to have to test out that parachute. We'll just gain a little bit more altitude here. I want to get at least 5,000 foot in hand, just so we've got a really good chance of recovering from that spin. And ideally we're going to stay roughly overhead Denham. And again, still getting around 1700 feet per minute out of the aircraft. Denham, I have to say, is another really nice scenery from Burning Blue Design. They haven't really put a foot wrong so far with their sceneries. Most of them have been really nice, and Denham is certainly no exception. I actually really like Denham. I like the feel of the place. It is somewhere I flew into many, many years ago as well, so fond memories of that. Anyway, just coming up on our 5,000 feet. We'll try a power off stall, so we'll come back on the throttle. I think that clicking you can hear there is the prop automatically being adjusted. I assume we're still getting the sound effect there from the prop lever. So the aircraft feeling very heavy and pitched there as the speed comes back. Oh, nice little buffet effect there, that's pretty impressive. And looks like we're stalling around 30 knots. Initially the nose mushing there, the nose finally dropping. Yeah, so pretty good stall characteristics overall. We did get the visual buffet, we've of course got the stall warning. Low stall speed, but the rotate speed is 45 knots, so that's to be expected. And again, pretty sedate behaviour from the aircraft, the nose just dropping down. But that's probably fairly accurate for the real world Sting, so overall pretty impressed. Anyway, once again we'll come back to idle power. This time we're going to try and induce a spin. Once again, there's the buffet, right back on the stick, the nose dropping. As I say, we'll spray the aircraft around a little bit, try and induce a spin here. Dropping the right wing. Not quite in a spin here, we're sort of doing more of a wing over really. And we'll feed in some rudder as well, see if we can't get the aircraft into a rotation. Yeah, it doesn't look like the flight model's too interested in spinning. Again, I assume the fact that we have the parachute would mean that the aircraft, once into a spin, is pretty much unrecoverable. But it doesn't look like in the FSReborn version we're actually going to get the aircraft to spin. We'll just try a power on still, see if we can induce a spin there with the engine power. Get a nice high nose attitude. So right back, just below 20 knots, definitely a little bit more of a snap there with the engine running. Okay, we do now have the aircraft in spin, rotation out to the right as you can see, reasonably aggressive, but as soon as I released the controls there that recovered fairly easily. So maybe the parachute's there for the spin characteristics, maybe it's not, I'm not entirely sure on that one. Nonetheless, of course we're going to have to give it a go, so we'll just work our way back overhead Denham. And then we'll try out the Sting S4's little party trick. Get the nose up, we'll just lose a little bit more speed here. And we'll pull the magic handle. So you can see the parachute deploying there, really nice animation as well I have to say. Hear the air noise dying off there as we lose the airspeed. And the parachute is deployed. Looks like we're actually drifting there as well with the wind, looks like we've got a bit of a drift. Heading out towards the east of Denham. Quite possibly looks like it's going to have us landing there either in a housing estate, possibly on the golf course, or worst case scenario there. Looks like we're going for a bit of a swim. So there you go guys, I hope you enjoyed our outing in the FSReborn Sting S4. Overall a really nice product and a really nice little aircraft from FSReborn, certainly done to a very high standard. I think I've made my feelings on the various areas of the aircraft pretty clear as we go, but as usual we'll just break things down into some categories and I'll give you my positives and negatives overall. Starting with the negatives, not much to say there really, other than the flight model. It does have a few areas that I would say are somewhat questionable. Firstly, we talked about the pitching and the buffeting there, particularly in pitch. I think I can see what FSReborn are going for there. It does give the aircraft a little bit more life, and it certainly does have its moments where it actually feels quite good, but overall I think it's a little bit overdone. It feels a bit unnatural, it feels quite digital, the aircraft pitching up and down. And as I say, it was fairly smooth conditions here at Denham this morning, at least according to the real world forecast, and it seemed to be the same with the live weather, so I wasn't really expecting to see that much life in the aircraft. Again though, always difficult to say without having flown the particular aircraft in question. So it might well be true to life of the real S4, I'm not entirely sure, I'll have to let you figure that one out for yourselves. The aircraft was also pretty sensitive in pitch in general, and the same on the rudder during the takeoff. Felt quite typical there of a Microsoft Flight Simulator aircraft, although overall the ground handling was pretty good, at least in the taxi. My last question really with the flight model, the aircraft did seem to be very sensitive to crosswinds. Having tried a couple of pretty minor crosswinds, the aircraft didn't seem to be too comfortable on the rudder there. It is of course categorised as an ultralight, and I've never flown an ultralight myself, so again that might be pretty accurate for this category of aircraft. I think it would have been broadly controllable, but again with that sensitive rudder it was quite hard to keep the aircraft happy and straight on the runway. To be clear though, it was fully controllable, it was just a case of the takeoff not looking particularly pretty. Otherwise though, as I said earlier on, I thought that the aircraft flew quite nicely, it felt good in roll. It did feel quite nice in pitch during the takeoff, the same was true during the flare on the landing. And in the flare, overall I thought the S4 felt fairly reminiscent of a real world aircraft. As I mentioned during the flight, the S4 is pretty sporty, it certainly picks up speed rather nicely. Again, I don't know whether or not the aircraft was performing to the numbers, but if you are familiar with the Sting then you can look for yourselves. Definitely a good option, as I say, if you do want to crack along quite nicely over the ground, you can easily get 110 knots out of the aircraft, and a really good rate of climb there as well, as we saw. The one last thing I would say about the flight model, overall I thought the stall was really good. I really liked the visual effect there, the fact we had the stall warning as well. The aircraft behaviour seemed pretty reasonable. I did notice though that the aircraft seemed to stall quite a bit below the stall warning tape there on the airspeed indicator. The aircraft will fly quite happily at pretty low speeds. We saw that V-rotate was 45 knots or thereabouts, but 20 knots for the stall certainly seems to be a little bit on the low side. The first stall the aircraft behaved pretty well, the second one it seemed to take a little bit longer for the stall to kick in. We did have a very high nose up attitude though. Anyway, that's all I can really say about the product that's negative. Certainly at this sort of a price point, the Sting S4 is a really excellent effort from FSReborn. Really nice once again to see one of these smaller devs coming in and showing the big boys how it's done. Plenty of positive things to say about the aircraft. Once again, the texturing and modelling of the aircraft is very well done overall. Really high standards both inside and outside of the aircraft, very immaculate. Couldn't really find much of anything there to fault. The livery selection is pretty decent as well. The repaints aren't hugely different. But nonetheless, there is a reasonable selection, and as you'll have seen during the flight, you can customise the registration, which is always a big plus point. Sounds absolutely excellent as well. The aircraft certainly sounded like it had a Rotax engine fitted. Again, very good both internally and externally. And the attention to detail in terms of the aircraft's cockpit systems with the switches and the various controls, all really good sounds there as well. The flight model, overall, I would say it's roughly in neutral territory. It's certainly not bad. The aircraft was good fun to fly. It does have some nice aspects and it certainly feels better than your average default aircraft, but again, a little bit oversensitive on the controls, and I did find that pitching up and down slightly odd. The stall behaviour was reasonable. I don't know how readily the Sting S4 will actually spin in reality, but it certainly took quite a bit of work to get the aircraft to spin here. And very easy to recover, so again, I would question having the ballistic chute fitted how true to life or not that is of the real-world aircraft. Systems depth is really good, everything seemed to work very nicely, and the level of attention to detail is actually quite special on the aircraft. We didn't touch on it all that much during the introduction, but we talked about the fact that the tyres will wear and tear. Well, FSReborn have actually gone to a whole lot more detail than that. The tyre pressures will actually even change based on the ambient temperature, and various other aspects of the aircraft. Very well modelled, quite a lot of depth there. So as I say, with the persistent state and the damage modelling, you really have to try and operate the S4 within its limits, and certainly try and fly it nicely if you want the aircraft to last. I've mentioned before, but I'm always a big fan of that. It certainly makes the whole simming experience a lot more immersive. And of course, the fact that you can have a failure potentially at any point really makes you fly the aircraft with a little bit more focus. Obviously, the real highlight of today's flight is that ballistic parachute. Very impressive modelling there, both in terms of the dynamics, but of course as well the visuals. I have to say I was pretty impressed there with what I saw from FSReborn. I certainly wasn't expecting to see the deployment in quite such detail. It's probably not something you'll be using on every flight, at least hopefully, but again, really well done and a really impressive feature. It goes to show what's actually possible in the sim when developers really put the work in. In terms of the aircraft's FPS, I was getting about 56 in the S4 versus about 63 in the default Cessna 152, so losing about 7 FPS overall. Again, pretty good considering the fact that the aircraft does have the G1000 fitted. As I say, for me the aircraft does fall slightly short on the flight modelling front, but otherwise a really excellent effort from FSReborn. A really nice option for cruising VFR, a very well modelled, very comprehensive product. Again, really nice to have systems failures modelled as well as the wear and tear and the persistent state. It really enhances the whole simming experience. And as I say, really nice to see these smaller developers producing such quality work, so always great to support them where you can. Anyway guys, as always I do hope you enjoyed the video and found it to be of use. If you did, please consider giving it a like. If you want to see more content from the channel, then please consider subscribing as well. As ever, a very big thank you to my channel members and patrons for all of your support, it's very much appreciated. I hope that all of you are having a great day wherever you are. Take really good care, and I will see you all again soon.